So, it is now time to kick things off with our first celebrity chef, and his name is Rick Bayless. I know you all know him. He is the master of modern Mexican cuisine, winner of Top Chef's Masters and multiple James Beard Foundation Awards, author of several best-selling books, including this one, which he will be signing later, Fiesta at Rick's. Gotta have this one on the bookshelf. And he is the chef and owner of Frontera and Topolobampo restaurants right here in Chicago. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a warm welcome to Chef Rick Bayless. Hi, Chef Bayless. Thank you so much.
Welcome. Did you all have late nights last night? You all sort of seemed like you were out doing what people do when they come to Chicago. I don't know how many of you are from Chicago. Only a very few of them. The rest of you were all out partying last night, so I can kind of get a little bit of the vibe of that. Well, welcome here this morning. I think that most of you know the flavors that I like to work with because they're the traditional Mexican flavors. But what a lot of you probably don't know is that I express those beautiful flavors with locally grown ingredients. So that means that if you come to Frontera Grill or Topolobampo or our quick service place, XOCO, you're going to taste things that taste a little different than they do in Mexico because they're made with our local ingredients. And we, of course, consider ourselves a real seasonal restaurant. We really like to keep up with the seasons. So you're going to taste things like when, say, the chico zapote, that wonderful tropical fruit, is in season in Mexico. You may find raspberries in season here in Chicago. So we won't be working with the tropical fruit as much as we'll be working with our local raspberries. So then people say, but I thought you did authentic Mexican food. And I do. I do the heart and soul of Mexican food, but expressed with our good local ingredients. So why don't I try to bring all of my food from Mexico? Well, I have a couple of reasons that I don't like to do that. Number one, I don't think it's sustainable. I don't think that shipping stuff 3,000 miles is going to make it any better or be a good use of the world's resources. So what I do is try to understand how a Mexican cook thinks and what's coming out of their heart and soul. And do we import some things from Mexico? Yes. A lot of the flavoring kinds of things like the dried chilies, some of the dried herbs, that kind of stuff we will use to flavor our dishes. But what we do is try to find local farmers that can grow a lot of those things. And then we either use them fresh or in many cases, we preserve those things by pickling them, drying them, freezing them. We do all kinds of things with them so that we can use them the year round. So this is the moment in Chicago when we have just been through the bleak winter. The weather starts to get good, but you know, the plants don't respond that fast. So even though it's nice outside, as chefs, we're all going here. It's like, when are they going to start bringing us stuff from our local farms? Because what we've just done is use butternut squash, all different kinds of pumpkins, all the potatoes, the storage radishes, until we were ready to scream. We wanted something fresh to taste. Now, we have a couple of farmers that have really learned how to do a lot of cool greens that they can do all winter long, not even in heated heated greenhouses, but they do them in unheated hoop houses, which is way more sustainable. So we do have some really amazing spinach that we get all winter long, but we want variety. So the first things that come in this climate are some of the spring greens, little greens that are harvested. And I have a huge garden at my house where we grow all kinds of, in fact, we grow all of the salad greens that we use in Topolobampo. So we got the first harvest of that this year because it was warm in March. We got that in the early part of March. So that was really cool. So we were excited about that. But when we really get excited is when the ramps come in. Now, how many of you have eaten ramps? Oh, good. So I'd say about a third of the audience has eaten ramps. A ramp is a wild onion or a wild cross between onion, garlic, leek, something like that. They grow, as far as I know, no one has ever cultivated them, so they have to be pulled from the wild. And they grow starting here and down through the eastern seaboard. And they go all the way down into Virginia and into the Carolinas. Now, if you ever go tromping in the springtime out into the woods and you step on a ramp, you know you've stepped on a ramp, because all of a sudden it felt like you just stepped on a head of garlic, and all the smell of that comes out because they're kind of pungent and strong. Well, what a lot of people don't know is that there are so many ramps here in Chicago area that that's actually what the name Chicago means. It means the place of the wild onions, or the place of the ramps. So we, as chefs, love that here when we can get the first ramps. So they look like little green onions, sort of with a bulb that gets a little bit bigger at the bottom. They have a kind of reddish tinge to them, but then the leaf that comes up is not straight. It doesn't look like a green onion at the top. It goes into this beautiful leaf. So we do all kinds of things with it. And of course, when the farmers start bringing in the ramps, we will also pickle a whole bunch of them, just the bulbous part of it. We pickle those so that we can use them for a long time. Second thing that comes in is also in that same garlic onion family, and that's the green garlic. And right now, the green garlic comes in at about the same time that the wild morels come in. And that's what really gets me excited. So that's what I'm going to cook with you today, is green garlic with morels. So, I mean, it couldn't be a better moment in the history of the Chicago year than right now, when we can make those two things together, because they go hand in hand. Now, if you've never worked with green garlic before, green garlic is the garlic before it forms a head. So this is the way you grow garlic, because a lot of people don't know about it. You plant garlic in the fall to harvest the following summer. So it goes through the whole winter here in the ground. So about November, we plant the garlic, and you just take a clove of garlic and put it in the ground about that far down, and that's all you have to do. Then it'll sprout up a little bit, but stays dormant during the winter. When the weather starts to change, it starts growing and looks like a green onion. And it will grow up, and then it'll get tall like a leek. And that's when you pick it if you want green garlic. And that's what I have here. So this is green garlic. You can see it looks very much like a leek. But you can also see that the base of it here is starting to become a bulb. Now that would just keep getting bigger and bigger, and eventually it would divide into cloves. And then along about the 4th of July, those cloves have completely formed, and you can start to pull the garlic. Now, if you try to use the garlic straight out of the ground on 4th of July, it'll be hot as firecrackers. It's so hot that you can't even believe it. It'll burn your tongue. So what we do is we hang the garlic up, and we let it dry for 3 weeks to a month. And in that drying process, it tames the fire of the garlic. But we also like it at this stage, when it's really gentle and lovely. Cross between the flavor of a green onion or a leek and garlic. So here's what you do with it. Well, I'm going to do one thing first. I'm going to put that whole thing of what we're going to do with the green garlic on hold while I talk about the mushrooms for just a second. So we have one supplier of cultivated mushrooms here that also forages for wild mushrooms, kind of a one-stop shop for us. But River Valley Ranch, and if you go to farmers markets in Chicago, they almost always have a place at all the farmers markets, and they do cultivated mushrooms, mostly just oyster mushrooms, shiitake mushrooms, button mushrooms, portobello mushrooms, the standard variety of things. But then on their property, they have a huge area where they collect a lot of morels, usually every year. So they just came in yesterday. So we're super excited. So I can share those with you. So you can look, and you want to get the picture of these beautiful morel mushrooms here. So these are brown morels. That's what we have here, not the white morels. The French chefs turn their noses up at the brown morels because they say that they're not quite as refined in flavor as the white ones. that's fine. What we have here is brown morels, okay? So I'm cooking with brown morels. And then we've got some of the shiitakes from River Valley Ranch. We've got some wild hedgehogs. Now, we don't really get hedgehog mushrooms around here. These came from the West Coast, Oregon, Washington area. And then I've got some of the brown beech, which I just love. Another cultivated mushroom, but I love them because they add such cool visuals and texture to any dish that you put them in. So we're going to take some of these over here to this side, and I'm going to just talk through some of the basics of how you work with them, so that in case you haven't worked with these before, you'll know what to do. I think I'll put that there, and then a big old handful of these gorgeous morels. Now, one thing when you're working with morels, let's do those first, okay? When you're working with morels, you have to wash them. Okay, I know a lot of like button mushrooms and stuff, they're like sponges and people hate to wash them, so they'll brush them off. Well, the morels, because of that honeycomb-like texture on them, they harbor lots of dirt, sand. They're usually grown in sandy soil or come up in sandy soil, so they'll have a lot of sand in there. Also, if there's any kind of those little teeny worms that sometimes come in these things, if there's any of those that have gotten in there and you don't see them, they'll come out if you submerge these in water. We always say you pretty much have to wash the morel mushrooms 3 times. So we want to make sure that they get really, really clean. But they are sort of spongy, so they will absorb some liquid. But that's not a bad thing, because they have so much flavor that as they start to cook, they'll release that liquid, and out comes the most gorgeous tasting, well, it's almost like a broth out of them. So that's not a bad thing. So what I do with the morel mushrooms is I look at the base and see if they're kind of crusty at the bottom or look like they need to be trimmed. These are actually in good shape, so I don't have to do that. I'm going to cut them across in rings because, well, they look like a sea creature. You see, I just think they're so cool looking, and that they will add another visual element to the dish that we're doing here. You can cut them in any way you want, but I like to cut them in rings. So we're going to put those into the bowl. Now, if you're using shiitakes, this is my recommendation. If you work in a restaurant, you should have a dish on your menu that utilizes the stems. The stems are not very tender ever. Now, if you have to use them in a finished dish, I always suggest you cut them crosswise, but very thinly, like that. But what we do is we collect them and we make a broth out of them, because we always have vegetarian dishes on it that we need a vegetarian broth. So we put all of the stems in that. The cap is very tender, so I just cut that across, and I'm going to cut it in about 1/4-inch slices across. Now, the hedgehog mushrooms have a fairly tough stem, but not nearly as tough as the shiitake. So I'm going to put that in. I'm just cutting that crosswise. And then the cap in 1/4-inch. Now, when you get to the brown beech, what do you do with those? Well, I think that this base part of it is a little spongy and weird, so I don't usually put that in there. I would cut that off, and I would put that in the same pot that I would save the shiitake stems in. So that becomes part of my broth making. And if you can figure out a way to always have some menu item that utilizes a little of the flavor of mushrooms without the pieces, then you can always use those things. Okay, so I'm going to put, now these you can do whole like this. I like to leave them whole because I just think they're pretty. They add a beautiful visual. You can feel free to cut those up if you would like. So I'm going to pass these over to Shaw here, and she's going to chop those while I work on the green garlic preparation here. So let's go back to green garlic here. What do we do with green garlic? Green garlic, you have to think about it sort of like you would think about a leek, except that they're not buried. So you know a leek is buried way down so that you get the blanched, as they call it, blanched, the white chunk of it that big. And then at where they're buried to here, so that a lot of the dirt gets in there. And so you have to split them and really wash them carefully. I love cooking with leeks. But they're a pain to clean. I always find them a real pain to clean. These are not a pain to clean. So because they're not buried so deep down. So I'm going to take these, cut the base of them off, and then I'm going to cut them at about 1/8 of an inch across into rings. And all of a sudden, you start smelling the beautiful cross between onion and garlic, leek. It's just so delicious. For this preparation, I'm going to utilize the solid part before it becomes leafy. I'm going to utilize all of that part of it. Now, that didn't cut through on that part there. I'll break it all up. So I'm going to put that into a saucepan here. Now, what am I going to do with this? For this particular preparation that I'm doing right now, I'm not going to utilize it. But I'll tell you that one of my favorite things to do, because the flavor is so good, is to brush these with a little bit of oil and grill them. They are just unbelievably delicious. You grill them slowly. You don't do it over a high fire. You do it over a kind of medium-low fire. And you just let them get smoky and soft. Then you can cut them up, and you can put them into salads. You can put them as a garnish on a creamy soup. Oh, my God. Like what they call en crema de elote, or fresh corn soup, a creamy corn soup in Mexico with grilled green garlic chive tops on it is like out of this world. Put a little bit of grilled shrimp in that, and you've got an entree, basically. It's a really delicious way to think about it. When you see where I'm going with this, I'm going to come back to the grilled tops and tell you another way you can finish this with the grilled tops. But let's go through the basic steps first. So I've got the bases sliced crosswise at about 1/8 of an inch. And now I'm adding olive oil. And what I'm going to make is basically a mojo de ajo, or what's called a bath of garlic in Mexico, and very related to what's called ajillo in Spain. So it's slow-cooked garlic in olive oil. When I say slow-cooked, I mean really slow-cooked. So I've got this olive oil to put on here, and then I'm going to set it on a low fire here. Now this olive oil I want to take a second to talk about, because it's one of my new favorite things. Most people don't think about Mexican food in relationship to olive oil, yet the Baja Peninsula of Mexico produces massive amounts of very high quality olive oil. In fact, it's such a big deal these days that all of the producers of olive oil in the Baja are starting to release their oils only by the varieties that they have. So it's like they'll say, which kind of olive oil do you want? One made from Mission, or from Nevadillo, or Avellana. There are all these different kinds of olive oils that they have that each have a different flavor. Now, this is a combination. This one you can actually find in the US. It's the version that we use in our restaurant exclusively. And it's a brand that's called Baja Precious. And you can order it from their website. For those of you that would be looking for it for a commercial application, they sell it in gallon jugs. It's I would say, a sort of moderately priced olive oil for a high-grade olive oil. I mean, it's not your standard sort of cooking olive oil. It's for use in dressings and things like that. But it's super, super delicious. A combination of Mission and Nevadillo olives, really rich. Most of these olives are grown right around Ensenada, about 2 hours south of the U.S. border. That's an amazing place for both olive trees and wine grapes. The only really great wine growing region of Mexico is right there where the olive, as you could imagine, where the olive trees are, because they both will thrive in the same kind of climate, the same kind of soil. So what I'm looking for here, and you might want to take a look at this here, because I think it would be really helpful for everybody to see. But what I'm looking for is just the tiniest little bit of bubble. I always say, when you get the olive oil to the right temperature, it looks like you have a glass of soda water in front of you. Very gentle bubbles coming up. And you want to leave it like this for about 20 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes. What's that? And you want to leave it 20 or 30 minutes until the green garlic is completely soft. So I have another one over here that has already been cooked that long, and you can see what happens. The green garlic starts to fall apart. You want to go into this one over here and so that they can see what it looks like over there. And we're going to give it its flavorings now. We have 3 flavorings that we're going to add to it. One of them is epazote. If you've never worked with epazote before, it's one of the pungent herbs, okay? When I first found epazote in the U.S., it was in someone's backyard, and they were pulling it out as a weed because in the U.S. we don't use it for culinary purposes. In fact, we don't use it at all. In fact, we think of it as this noxious weed that everyone hated to pull out of their backyards because it's got such a strong aroma to it that people typically call it stinkweed. Okay, so it's a pungent herb. In Mexico, where they love a lot of bold flavors, they know how to work with its pungency, and they let it soften and cook with things where its flavor mellows and it broadens out. I'll never forget the first time that I tasted raw, fresh rosemary. And I thought, oh my gosh, how could anybody eat this stuff? It's just so pungent when you taste it raw. But then you let it mellow with something, and it just is so glorious. Same sort of thing with epazote. It's a pungent herb. So I'm going to take a little of this. I don't really want the stem for this part of it because an epazote stem is really strong and hard. So I'm going to slice crosswise here, making a chiffonade of epazote to add to our cooked green garlic in olive oil. And then I'm going to add 2 other things to it. I'm going to brighten the flavor with a little lime juice, and I'm going to bring out the savory qualities with a little bit of salt. So I've got this heated now, reheated. I'm going to throw in the epazote, give it a nice douse of salt here. By the way, you can do this. You don't have green garlic. You can do the same thing with leeks. You can do the same thing with regular garlic chopped up. It'll take a little bit longer to cook it, but not too much longer. And now I've got my lime here and a Mexican lime squeezer someplace. But where did it go? Where is my Mexican lime? Oh, it's underneath the towel. Thank you. It was right here for a second ago. If you haven't used this piece of kitchen equipment, it's super efficient because it basically turns the lime inside out. I'm sure many of you have seen me do this before, but if you haven't done this and you decide you are going to put it in the way that it looks logical that you would put it in, right, like that, just realize that there's nowhere for that juice to go except right into your face. So you only do that once, and then you realize that this thing is designed to flip the half of a lime over so that you can literally turn it inside out, which is what I'm going to do. So not only am I getting the juice out of this thing, and it's a very efficient way to juice it, but I'm also crushing the skin of the lime, releasing a lot of those essential oils that actually give it such a beautiful lime flavor. So this only takes a couple minutes. What happens here is the salt and the lime juice will be soaked up into the green garlic or whatever you've in that family you're using. They will be soaked up into that. And then the epazote will flavor the oil. It will release its flavor into the oil. But you don't have to let that go for very long. Just a couple of minutes like that. Now, I've got my mushrooms here, and I'm going to season them with a little of this green garlic mojo de ajo. Now, you could do this as a sauteed dish if you wanted to. You could take just some of the oil off the top to saute the mushrooms, and then use them in another preparation wherever you would use sauteed mushrooms. Or you can do what I'm going to do today, which is to make something that's called a michiote. I just got back from Puebla, the state that is just east of Mexico City. It's a very famous state from a culinary standpoint because it's the place where two of the most famous dishes from Mexico are said to have come from or been invented. The most famous one, of course, is mole poblano. The poblano part of it refers to the state of Puebla or the town of Puebla. The other really famous dish is chiles en nogada that is served for Mexican Independence Day. Now, today is May 5th. It is not Mexican Independence Day. I just have to set you guys all straight on this thing. Mexican Independence Day is the 16th of September. And May the 5th, Cinco de Mayo, is a date that is really not celebrated in Mexico hardly at all, except in the state of Puebla, the place that I just came from, where they celebrate it because there was a battle that they won against the French invasion 150 years ago. Not an important thing for most people. Okay? Certainly not an important thing for most people in Mexico, let alone in the United States. But for some reason, we have latched onto it, encouraged a lot by the beer companies. We have latched on to Cinco de Mayo as one of the great Mexican holidays. And of course, everybody assumes that it must be Mexican Independence Day, but it's not. It's a very minor day. It's like Washington's birthday in Mexico. You don't celebrate it. It's just that the banks are closed and maybe the kids don't go to school, but otherwise they don't really celebrate it much in Mexico at all. So we're at Cinco de Mayo here, talking about Puebla, which is where that battle happened. And but on real Mexican Independence Day, they make this beautiful stuffed chili dish that has a white sauce on it. So you've got a green stuffed poblano chili with a white sauce, and it's decorated with pomegranate seeds and tufts of flat leaf parsley, so that you get the red, white, and green of the Mexican flag, and that's what people make for the Independence Day. Hugely popular in central Mexico. Okay, so let's finish I brought up Puebla because in Puebla they make michiotes. And you know what the agave plant is? The agave plant is the plant that is where they roast the heart of it and make tequila out of it. Another version of it, they sort of cut a hole in the top of it and they take out this sap that is produced in it and they make a fermented beverage called pulque. Well, that plant, you can literally strip a parchment-like sheet off the exterior of every one of those fleshy leaves. And so it really looks like parchment paper. Well, it's become unpopular in Mexico to use the real michiote because it kills the plant. So from ecological standpoint, to pull those strips of parchment like covering off the leaves is not advisable, I think. So a lot of people have turned to making fake michiotes, and they're doing it in parchment paper because that's kind of what it looks like anyway. It doesn't have the flavor, but it has the same properties when you're cooking. So I've got a sheet of this. The michiote is not really available in the United States, and it's not supposed to be available in Mexico, though you can go into lots of markets and find it. It's supposed to have been outlawed. But I'm going to take this piece of cut parchment paper here. I want to sprinkle a little bit more salt on the mushroom mix here. Toss that. This is just so beautiful to look at these gorgeous, gorgeous mushrooms, to smell that green garlic, and to know that we're at that moment in the year that is unlike any other. And I'm going to take a spoonful of the garlicky mushroom mixture there. Let's take some more of these leaves of epazote and just throw them whole into this package. Just look at that, how beautiful that is. Those gorgeous mushrooms with the beautifully light look of the epazote leaves. And then I pull the four corners together. Basically what we're making here is what's called a beggar's purse. So you're going to collect all the edges of it here. And in some ways, you're doing exactly the same thing from a different fold as when you cook fish in parchment paper. When you're doing that one, of course, you make that big heart-shaped thing, lay your fish on one side of it, fold it over, and do that little tight edge on it, which is really cool. But this is to make a beggar's purse out of the parchment. Now, I'm going to tie it here with some string. I know that's kind of crass looking. Martha Stewart would not like what I'm doing here at all. She would have a special type of raffia made for this thing, I'm sure. And so you tie that up. Now, what happens when this cooks in the oven is all of those mushrooms release their juices. And then you got this little steaming package. It's almost like its own little pressure cooker, forcing the beautiful flavors of the slow-cooked green garlic and olive oil and epazote straight into those mushrooms and mixing with the juices and all of that. So you put it onto a baking sheet and you cook them for about 20 minutes or so. And we've got some here that are about ready. I'll tell you what I look for. I'm not seeing it here exactly, but I know they're done when I see a little bit of bubbling in the bottom of the package. Then you know that the juices have come out and they're starting to boil in there, and that's usually just about the right time to take them out of the oven. These, by the way, I prefer them straight out of the oven and not allowed to cool and reheat. I think they're better if you do that because they'll have a fresher aroma. But if you're going to use these in a commercial setting, it's going to be hard to allow that 20 or 25 minutes to do it. So we do, right before service, we will par cook them maybe 15 minutes to get them started. And then on pickup, we'll actually oftentimes take a skillet with a little bit of oil in the bottom of it that's hot, and drop them into that skillet so that that heat comes up real fast. So in 5 more minutes, maybe 7 more minutes, they're bubbling ferociously underneath. Take it out, then put your towel down there, dry them off, and then present them. So the presentation for these things is typically, and it was so funny, I was walking down I was at this big conference in Puebla this week that is the first ever mole festival in Puebla. And I was one of the speakers at it, but they did had a corridor of all of these people from all of the different areas of Puebla making their special moles. And so you got a chance to taste all these different ones. It was really, really fun. But one of the groups was not only doing mole, but they were doing other specialties from their area. And one of them had lamb done in michiotes, the traditional michiote paper, if you can call it that. And they have little pieces of lamb, and they cut it up with the bone, put a red chili sauce on it, avocado leaves, which have an anise-like flavor to them, put those into the packet, and then they steam the packet for about 4 hours. Oh my God, the flavor was unbelievable because all that stuff just is concentrated and cooked together. So I've got my little package here. I'm going to open it up a little bit, put it on a plate. Now I like, because this is the way I would do this for sort of a fine dining, more of a fine dining preparation here, but I like to put the top on the plate as well so that you can see that it had that sort of mushroom-like cap on the top of it there. Now I'm going to take a little bit of lime because I love to put some lime, squeeze some lime on here. I want to show you something that maybe you don't know. This is if you travel to Mexico, you'll see it all the time. But if you cut 3 chunks out of the side of this, this is the way you find a lot of the limes cut in Mexico for squeezing. So, you've probably had the experience I've had squeezing a wedge of lime, and it just squeezes all over your neighbors and the table and everything else. If you cut your lime like this, it will squeeze and just dribble right down on your food. But then most people look at that and go, but look at what you've got left. That's not a very good use of it. Well, in Mexico, it's a perfectly good use of it because all you do is just cut this thing about, stick it in your juicer, and they use so much fresh squeezed lime juice in Mexico, they have a use for all of those limes. So you can think about that. Maybe you're going to have a party and you're just going to entertain some people and you want the limes to look beautiful and be good and you're going to make some margaritas. Well, think about using the center part of it for your margaritas and then put your lime on the side. I'm going to take a few of these gorgeous epazote leaves. This is a totally useless kind of garnish. I always say you should never have anything on a plate that can't be eaten. And this, you don't want your guests really doing this. But I'm doing it today. I'm telling you what I'm doing, okay? I'm going to put them on there because I just love the look of those beautiful epazote leaves today. And that would be a beautiful little dish for people to put into soft corn tortillas, squeeze the lime juice on there. You might want to put a little bit of roasted tomatillo salsa to go with them if you want. Make little tacos. You will be absolutely in heaven. So you look at this thing and you think, I'm making tacos out of morel mushrooms and green garlic. Shouldn't I be doing something that's fancier with that? You could do fancier things all day long, but you will never do anything that is more delicious than a little soft taco of that mixture with a little of that lime juice on the top of it. Thank you all so very much.
That was incredible.
Thank you, sir.
I know that we have some questions in the audience, so I'm going to run and get a mic, and you guys get your questions ready. And who has a question for Chef Rick Bayless? Yes. What is your question?
Hi there, Chef. I was wondering, you had said when you pick the garlic and it's fresh, it's really hot. Do you ever have a use to use it at that point?
My mic back, please. Yeah, I don't like it that way because I think it overwhelms the dish. The question, if you didn't hear it, was about when you harvest garlic and it's so blazing hot right off the bat, do I have any special dishes that use that? I don't like it because I find like it just overwhelms the dish. In fact, I got a little ahead of myself last year after we harvested our garlic, and I tried to use some of it, and I was like, I couldn't taste anything else in the dish that I was making besides that. So I think it really does need to mellow a little bit.
We have another question right over here, Chef Bayless.
Yes, please.
Hi. Cooking it in a pressure cooker, what would you think?
Do I like cooking in a pressure cooker?
This particular dish.
Oh, it would blow up. This is not good for a pressure cooker. This one is not good for a pressure cooker, I think. When I said it's almost like its own little pressure cooker, it would be very low pressure. All it does is kind of seal things in. I'm a huge fan of pressure cookers, and I think that we haven't even begun to explore all the cool things you can do with them. And having lived in Mexico City for a really long time at 7,500 feet, pressure cooker was my friend because I could cook beans that didn't take 5 or 6 hours to get done. So I do love pressure cookers. And one of my favorite things to do is make stock in a pressure cooker. I don't know if you've ever done that, but man, you can turn out stock that is unbelievable in a pressure cooker.
How much time do you spend a year in Mexico, Chef Bayless?
I'm usually, my life is a little hectic, I have to say. So I don't spend long periods of time, but I'm in Mexico usually 5 or 6 times a year. One time a year, I go down there and I spend a week scouting for my television show that's on public television. And then we go back and we'll spend 2 weeks there shooting. So that's pretty much the longest time that I'm in Mexico. But it's really fun time for me because we always concentrate in our show on one region of Mexico. So I get to know that region really well. And then every year we take a staff trip to Mexico where about 35 of us from our restaurant go, and we always piggyback on wherever I've gone in the TV show. So I get to go to that region usually 3 times in the period of 1 year. So I get to know that region or get to reacquainted with that region in great depth. And last year we were in Baja California. That's why I talk so much about Baja, and I just fell in love with it. I hadn't been there in 20 years, and I couldn't believe all the things that had changed. But then this year we're going to Oaxaca, and we're going to spend all that time really focusing on Oaxaca.
Another question right over here, sir.
Chef, on the green onion leaves that you've grilled, is that something that could be put into a sauce then pureed? Does it need to be
Which kind of leaf?
The green onion, the green garlic that you've grilled.
Oh, yeah. You know, and I was going to say you could grill them and add them back to this mixture too. I never said that at the end, but you can grill them and then at the end add them back to this. Or sometimes we'll puree it with it, creating an almost emulsified looking sauce that is just gorgeous and green and everything.
Right over here, another question. Yes.
Depends on what you want. I'm going to answer the last part of his question here. Sorry. He asked that would you have to strain it? That's what you asked, right? It depends on what you're looking for texture. I did it just this last week, and I didn't think I needed to strain it. But if you were looking for something that had a very satiny texture, yes, I would just put it through a strainer.
Right over here, yes.
Did I read that you went to the
Can you speak up a little? I can't hear.
Yes. Oh, well,
Not that loud.
Did I read that you went to the University of Michigan?
Yes.
How do you explain that you, Stephanie Azar, Gabriel Hamilton, Ruth Reichel all went to the University of Michigan?
We all had good taste. Now, what's her name? Sarah Moulton went to U of M. Stephanie Izard went to U of M. You know, I have to say, there's something about the culinary culture in Ann Arbor, Michigan that is really special. I was there 100 years ago. I'm like the old person. Well, no, actually, Ruth Reichel's a few years older than I am. But when I was in Ann Arbor, that was before all the eat local and farmers markets and all that. And this, we're talking in the early 70s here. And I have to say that there was the most amazing farmers market in Ann Arbor. And that's where I really got revved up. I grew up in a restaurant family, so I'm fourth generation in a restaurant family, but where I really, really learned to cook in a broad sense was from the Ann Arbor Farmers Market in the 70s. It was so amazing, and now it's even that much more. But back when people weren't even talking about locally grown, they had it. And of course, the famous Zingerman's Deli's there and all that. It's just an amazing place from a culinary standpoint, not so much from a restaurant standpoint, but from people cooking great food in their homes.
When were you first introduced to Mexican cuisine, Chef?
I went to Mexico when I was 14 for the first time. And there was a sense for me when I got there that somehow I had come home, that this was the place that would always be my spiritual home, because I got off the plane and just felt at ease. I felt like this place is where I want to be. It's such I call it a vibrant culture, but it's a culture that just opens its arms to life in a way that I had never seen before, and to tell you the truth, I've never seen since.
We have another question right over here. Yes.
I was wondering about the play that just recently ended.
Yes.
Unfortunately, I wasn't here to see it. Are you going to do another one of the performances?
Yes. The play that I just finished, it's called Cascabel. We had a 6-week run at Looking Glass Theater Company here. And my goal was, I was one of the co-writers of it. There were 3 of us that put it together. And my goal was to have people experience food in a way that most of us have gotten away from in the United States. We're such a fast food culture, a drive-through culture. Everybody's eating so that they don't feel hungry, but they're never stopping to really think so much. Probably not you guys, but most of the country is just not stopping to really think about how beautiful the food is that is there in front of them. And if you don't stop, you can't let that food affect you in the way that food can affect you. I'm sure all of you have had that experience where you tasted something and suddenly it reminded you so much of a place or a person that for a moment you're just completely overwhelmed with feelings of love or longing or sadness or happiness, whatever it is. But all of those are triggered by food. And so many people in our country don't have the opportunity to do that because we've gotten so much into this fast food culture. So I wanted to create a theater piece where people could be led to have that experience. And so we did this. We had 150 people every night, and we served them. The story was about a meal that affected people deeply. and everybody in the audience was seated. The whole thing was set in a boarding house. So they were all seated at boarding house tables. So the set was a boarding house, and then you were just like part of the set, basically, if you were one of the people in the audience. And we served you the whole meal that so deeply affected the people that were in the story, the actors that were in the story. And my role in it, I was the boarding house cook, as you could imagine, and my role in it was to cook the whole meal. So I cooked the whole meal every night. And in cooking a meal, you create these amazing aromas. So all of the theater, right now I'm smelling this beautiful green garlic with this olive oil up here, and it's hard to talk because my mouth keeps watering because it smells so delicious. But that's what I wanted people to have an experience of in the theater, because you can see a movie about food, but you don't smell anything. You can read a novel about food, but you don't smell anything. You don't know what it really tastes like. You don't know what your reaction to that food would be. So I wanted to create an environment where people could smell it. And what I made every night on stage was mole. And when you make mole, it has all these different ingredients, and they just fill the air with their aromas. And I wanted the opportunity to let people smell each one of those aromas every night as it goes into the pot, so that then people would be primed when they taste their mole. They would have already been, their appetites would have been whetted. And so it was an amazing experience. The thing about the show was that there was so much buzz about it that before we even opened, all the tickets were gone. So next time that we do this, if there is a next time, hopefully it'll be a little bit easier for people to get, because once the reviews started coming out, people would say, oh, no, I've got to go see that. Well, the tickets were all gone by the time the reviews came out. So hopefully we'll do it again, and we'll have more tickets available. And we only could seat 150 people at Looking Glass Theater, and maybe we'll move it to a place where we could serve 200 people. I don't know, something like that, so we have a few more seats.
We have another question. Yes, sir.
Yes, Chef, with your mojo de ajo, does that work well as a long-term marinade with like beef and chicken? And can you expand the flavors with any chilies or anchos and not lose the mask the flavor of the garlic?
Basically, you start with olive oil and with some garlicky product. And then I like to add a little bit of lime juice to it, salt. Lime juice, I think, pops the flavors. But then after that, the door's open. You can put whatever you want. I put epazote in it today. Lots of times we'll take chipotle chili and put that in there, like the canned chipotle, because they're soft, and chop that up. It'll add a smoky element to it. We've made an habanero version of this. For that one, I cut the habaneros in half and throw them in and then fish them out at the end. They will have given enough heat and flavor to it just that way that you don't have to chop them up or anything. You can do all kinds of herbs in there, but right at the very end, the sky's the limit when you're talking about this. I always keep some of this in my refrigerator in some version or another, because it is the most wonderful thing that when I'm cooking for my family on Sunday or Monday nights, I can just go take a little of the oil off, and I've got that beautiful flavored oil. I can take some of the solids and mix it into some eggs and scramble them on Sunday morning. You know, it's just, there's so many things that you can do with it. This stuff will last in your refrigerator for, basically, I say, in good shape for 2 or 3 months. So it's just very nice to know that you've got something that you can always turn to as a great flavoring agent that has oil in it, so you could just use the oil or the solids.
We have another question right over here, Chef.
Where are you? Oh, there you are.
Okay. First, I'd like to say my mom is your biggest fan.
Thank
and
you.
she wishes she
You're
could be
not,
here.
but your mom is.
I
Okay.
am as well. But I was wondering, is it easier for you to find Mexican produce and ingredients in the Chicago area?
Yeah. You know, Chicago has the second largest concentration of Mexicans in the United States. So we have over 1 million Mexicans that live within the city limits of Chicago, which is about 20% of our population. You can imagine with that kind of population that the ingredients are very easy to get. And in fact, because it's much more recent immigration, say, than what you find in LA or South Texas, we have more ingredients from Mexico here because there's demand for it than in many other places. So when we checked out, my wife and I, my wife is from here, but when we checked out all these places, we lived in LA for a little bit, we traveled a bunch in South Texas, we traveled to San Francisco. We were trying to find the right place for us to cook. we decided Chicago was the place for us to cook because the availability of Mexican ingredients is unbelievable in this town. And so I'm still very happy about it. I say the bedrock that we built our restaurant on are the tortillas that we serve on the table. And there are a dozen artisanal tortilla factories in Chicago, more than any other city in the United States, without doubt. But also, I almost would venture to say there's more artisanal tortilla factories here than in any city in Mexico, because most of the tortilla factories in Mexico have gone to using the dry powdered mix, and they just add water to it, the masa harina, and they add water to it and make the tortillas. But here, the artisanal ones start with whole kernel corn. They cook it in an alkali bath. They wash it really well. They stone grind it, because you have to stone grind that stuff. If you put it through a metal mill, it'll wreck the masa. So they stone grind it, and then it doesn't last more than a few hours. So they deliver it to the grocery stores and the restaurants fresh every day. So we get a couple 100 pounds of it delivered to our restaurant every morning. And at the end of the day, what's left goes to the trash. And then we start with the fresh ground stuff the next morning. And that's one of the reasons I love living in Chicago and cooking in Chicago, because we have such an amazing availability of Mexican ingredients here.
We have time for one more question right over here.
Hi, Chef. My name is Lupita. I am from Mexico. And I just want to congratulate you because you translate the recipes, the Mexican recipes, with integrity, with passion,
Thank you.
And with a lot of flavor. So congratulations.
How very nice of you. Thank you very much. And thanks to all of you for being here. Thanks for getting up early and coming out this morning. I'm going to be signing books right after this, right over there.
Thank you, Chef Rick Bayless.
My pleasure.
Amazing. Really appreciate it. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, Chef Rick Bayless will be signing his book, Fiesta at Rick's, momentarily, right over there in the corner. You can all have a chance to say hello and take his signature home, as well as these many inspiring recipes.